Hey guys, are you looking to write an incredible college essay, but maybe don't know quite how to do that? If so, look no further. In this video, I'm going to give you guys 3 of my best college tips so that you can make your essays even more awesome. My name is Brooke. I am an independent college consultant and I work with students one-on-one to help them get into their universities of choice. Every year I have students applying to top 10, top 20 schools, and I help them come up with what are you going to write in your essays and how are you going to execute on that. So that's what I'm going to share with you guys today. I've created a couple of courses for the SAT and the ACT. You can check those out at SupertutorTV.com. And if you like the tips that I'm sharing here today, be sure to subscribe to our mailing list for free at SupertutorTV.com/subscribe. Cool. So whether you're trying to get into a university with a 70% admit rate or one with like a 7% admit rate, writing a great college essay can help you secure a spot at the college that you want to attend. Increasingly, essays are becoming so important because with test optional, with COVID cutting so many people's exposure in the classroom down, being able to express yourself is really, really critical as you apply to college. When you apply, your college essay needs to convey several things, right? One, it's got to prove to colleges that you are more than just numbers and statistics, etc., and it helps show them the human side of you. And second, it's also an exercise in showing your capacity for analysis, for thoughtfulness, and for knowing how to write. But even more than just knowing how to write, it's also how do you think. So my first tip for you guys is to use contrast when you're writing your essays. One of the biggest problems that I see with so many college essays is that they're boring, they're vanilla, they're plain. And I feel like when I read an essay, it's something I've read 100 times before. Remember, in the college admissions process, your goal is to stand out in your essay because that's what's going to distinguish you among the admissions committee. That's what's going to put a little more weight on your application and make you stand out. Why else have essays if not to try to distinguish certain students, right? So in order to stand out, I want you to use contrast because contrast is a technique that we have as writers to enable our writing to jump off the page, to be different, to sing in a way that captures people's attention. Let me give you an example of a bland college essay. Let's say one of the most foundational things that happened to you in your life was that you moved sophomore year in high school. And you can say, sophomore year, I moved to a new school, or maybe you even moved to a new country. Then it was hard to adjust. You didn't know very many people and it felt isolating. Over time, however, you got used to it. You met new friends, you joined activities, and you got involved. From doing those things, you realized that you can fit in here too. And now you feel like you fit in. All very typical, all very predictable. Obviously, whenever you start something new, it takes a little while to adjust. That's a normal process. But if that's the story that I'm telling, there's not a lot of contrast in there. So there's 2 kinds of contrast that I'm going to talk about today that you can use in order to improve your essays. And the first one I'm going to talk about is surprise, and the other is irony. So surprise, you guys probably know what surprise means. That means like, oh, I didn't expect that. Wow, that came out of nowhere. I'm going to give you an example of one way one of my students once brought surprise to his essay, and it worked. He got into his top choice college, which was an Ivy League school. What he did is when most students write about their interests, and then they write about what they've done to show that they're interested in these things, and then because they did that activity, they're interested in that. So for example, I'll have students and they say, I'm really interested in computer science. I did a camp that taught me Python, and I learned Java in a class at school, and then I took CS AP Computer Science at my high school, right? And therefore, from all these experiences, I wrote a bunch of programs, and I want to do computer science. I like computer science. There's no real contrast in there. It's like, I like it. I did these 3 things or 5 things or whatever you did, and therefore I still like it. There's not a lot of process there. It's pretty straightforward. It doesn't really tell me anything that I couldn't have gotten from just reading your activities list and your major selection. I want to learn more about you. So how do we do that? Well, you stand out, and you stand out by reflection and contrast. So this guy, he wanted to do a particular career, but he did an internship in that and then figured out, I really don't want to do that. So here's an example of a kind of story that might go along those lines. let's say you wanted to be a talent agent because you were really interested in the entertainment industry. You thought it would be really cool to represent people like writers and directors and celebrities, to put movies together and to kind of work behind the scenes to make stories that impact people's lives come to life and to be a part of all those players. But let's say over the summer you pulled some strings and dad kind of helped you out and got you an internship at a talent agency, and you realize, you know what? I don't want to be a talent agent, but doing this helped me realize something. It helped me realize actually what I was interested in when it came to being a talent agent wasn't just being around famous people. It wasn't just like entertainment or the movie industry. It was actually that I want to be somebody who is working with people and connecting people. And preferably, I'd like to connect people who I like and who are good people. But that's pushed me to kind of be more interested maybe down the line in business. And maybe I want to get an MBA. Or maybe I want to work on, team building or management or something along those lines. But this experience gave me insights into what about that I was actually attracted to and what about that I'm not that into. That's more interesting because it's surprising. It's not what we necessarily expect. We expect you to have an interest, to do an activity in that interest and to say, yes, I like this, right? That's what everybody says. So if you say, no, actually, I don't like this, but I learned this about myself and I learned that about myself and I actually like this piece over here that I was doing, but I don't like this piece over here and here's the next direction I'm going to try and I'm excited to explore my interests. You could even be, a little bit vulnerable and not totally sure where you want to head. And that's okay too, right? That's also not typical. It's typical to be like, and now I'm going to do this and I love this, right? That's what everybody else is writing. It's okay to say, you know what? I know I don't want to do this, but I'm interested in this and I'm interested in this and we'll see where my next experience takes me. But I know something about myself and here's what I can put a dot behind, and that's that I'm somebody who's going to experience life and be flexible and adapt as I encounter new situations and find a niche that does work for me through exploration, right? And so that's an essay that could be positive. Second thing that we're going to talk about is irony. So irony is just when you point out a natural contrast that exists. I once had a student who wrote about his sport and how he excelled at his sport, but how an individual sport in and of itself is kind of pointless, right? If I'm a tennis player and I play singles, whether I win or lose a match, like all it contributes to is my personal glory in some way. Right? And I don't see how do I make the world a better place by playing tennis, right? And that's a question that he asks kind of in the beginning of his essay. That's an interesting place to start, an interesting, ironic place. Hey, I dedicate my life to this thing and I love it, but I think it's pointless, kind of. Or a lot of people might think it's pointless. What do I do with that? And then, of course, got back to, well, there is a point, right? But what is the point? And then how does that point apply to other pieces of our lives? But he first started by pointing out this irony, and then how do you grapple with that irony? Right? That's irony. So whatever your contrast is, I want you to look for in your life, how can you see surprise or how can you see irony and how can you write into that space? Because that can start a really interesting conversation that can make your story pop off the page in the same way that if I draw black lines on a white piece of paper, it's crisp, it's sharp, it's easy to see, and it engages us as a reader. Number 2, my second tip is find your you. And what I want you to figure out is who are you, and then how do you get that you on the page? One of the biggest mistakes that students make is they don't fully get enough of who they are into their essay. We want to get to know you in a way that we can't get to know you just from your grades and your test scores and your accomplishments. I want to know a facet of you, a side of you that I couldn't see just by looking at all that data. So you want to make sure that you get yourself on the page. To do that, you've got to figure out who am I. And so a few things that I usually recommend people do. One, I say make a list of all the things awesome about you that you think colleges should know. But to help you in making that list, I'm going to give you some categories of things you can consider. So the first thing that I want you to do is think Inside Out. And I literally mean the Disney movie Inside Out. In that movie, if you guys have seen it, the characters all have something called core memories. And these core memories make the character who she is, right? So what I want you to think about is what are your core memories, right? They're basically the memories that in your life, they determine your personality in some way, right? They determine why you are the way you are, why you choose the things you choose. Number 2, think about your core commitments. And what I mean by core commitments is there's probably places that you spend a lot of your time. And it makes sense for a lot of my students to talk about the things that they spend a lot of their time on. You've got to be careful on this one because a lot of times students will mistake this for take your resume and then write an essay that's your resume in sentence form. No. I say core commitments, not activities, because core commitments means part of yourself has been dedicated to this. If you've dedicated yourself to this, there's something deeper than just activity, right? This means you've spent so much time doing this that there's probably some life lesson you've learned. There's probably some reason why you've committed so much time to this, or something that you've gained from it. And there's probably something to unearth there. Next on my list is people who matter, your core relationships. Who are the core relationships in your life that define you, right? In my video that is College Essays That Work, one of my college essays that works is family, right? And why is family so effective? Because they're typically a core relationship. They're a type of relationship that defines your personality, that tells us more about who you are. And finally, your core values. What are the values that define who you are? And how do the stories of your life reveal that that's something that's driving you? And again, your goal is to write all this stuff down and then make sure that the best of you gets on the page. And if it's not, you've got to somehow brainstorm scenes that show you exhibiting these kind of ideas, right? Now that brings me to number 3, which is story and theme are your essential ingredients. You can't have a great college essay without story and theme, probably both, at least one. You've got to have, and theme is probably the one that you can't do without. You can pull off an essay without much story if the theme is really well developed and it's sort of heady and intellectual or conceptual. I've seen it done. It doesn't happen very often, but it can be done. Most of the time we have a combination of story and theme. Now when I say story, a lot of you have the misconception that the best way to write a college essay is to pick one thing that happened in your life and write the whole essay about that one thing. And you spend 2/3 of the essay writing about the whole story, and then the last paragraph is sort of just like patched on like a Band-Aid, but it's not woven. And that can be less satisfying sometimes than an essay that's woven. So how do you get out of that sort of typical rote story theme pattern? Well, one thing is remember that oftentimes great essays aren't just a single story. Oftentimes it's multiple stories that intersect because there's an overlapping pattern that goes on or there's an overlapping theme. So for example, I might have a story about an event that happened at school that revealed a time when I helped kids. And I might have another story about, when I was visiting my aunt and I encountered racism. When I was visiting my aunt's house and there was like an incident that happened in front of her house that was kind of racist between some neighbors that had a kerfuffle or whatever. And so this was me witnessing racism over here, and this was me trying to help out in my community over here. And I wasn't necessarily battling racism, but what I was trying to do is see somebody from a different point of view and not judge them because they weren't like me. And so maybe this becomes an essay where the theme becomes accepting people who don't seem like you or look like you. And part of it is about racism and the other part is about some personal example, but you somehow weave those together. You find a connection, you see a pattern, and then you make better observations and analyses. That can be really satisfying. So there you go, guys. 3 tips for your college essays. Use contrast, find your you, and story and theme are your essential ingredients. Okay, everybody? I hope you guys like this video. If so, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to our channel if you haven't yet. I have lots more videos on how to crush your college essay, so be sure to check those out. Good luck on your essays. Let us know how it goes in the comments, and I will see you next time. Thanks for watching, you guys. Bye-bye.